Welcome to another video. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to change your front brake pads on a 97 to 2003 Ford F-150 two-wheel drive. Stay tuned.
Music bed.
First thing I'm going to do to get started is go ahead and raise the vehicle up, put some jack stands underneath, and remove the wheels. Okay, now that the vehicle's in jack stands, make sure it's secured. Safety first. We have the brakes here. So these are worn out about halfway. It's not too bad, but we're going to put new rotors on there and new pads. Now with the two-wheel drive, the main thing with this is that you have to remove the rotor, which has the bearings all built in. So it has the hubs and everything. Now, if you're doing this and you haven't really done this on your vehicle, I would recommend just go ahead and buy new bearings. So you buy an inner bearing, an outer bearing, and a new seal. You might as well just do it while you're here. No, you can always reuse the old ones. That's entirely up to you. I mean, these bearings, you know, I ordered them on Rock Auto. They were about $4 each. The seal was a couple dollars, obviously plus shipping. But you know, I did go with the VCA, which is a good brand. You can go with National. I just wouldn't go with like the really like house brands, things like that, just because it's your wheel bearing. So I'm gonna show you before we go ahead and remove. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the old ones. But I'm going to show you how to pack your rotor. So even if you're reusing your old bearings, you have to transfer them over here. When you buy a new rotor, it does come with the race installed in here. So you don't have to worry about that part. So you would just reuse your bearing into the new race. And that's the other thing, is that most of the time your bearing is seated to that race. You know, it kind of wears in a specific pattern. So if you only change the race, then you might contribute to the bearing wearing out faster, because now it's not riding on the same surface as it's used to. So again, that's really up to you. But let me take this off and then we'll go ahead and get this prepped to put it back on. First thing that we're going to do here is remove your brake caliper. Now for removing your caliper, there's normally two different ways you can do this. So you have the small bolts out here on the edge, and that only really moves the caliper. Let's say you're only changing your brake pads, so you remove it from both of these bolts, take the caliper out, you change your pads, put them back in. Since we're taking the rotor out, we have to remove the caliper bracket, and so these are the bolts that are farther in. I'm probably going to do it separately, just that way when I put the pads I can put them on the bracket and then put the caliper back in there. But that's the two different ways that you can remove that. I'm guessing it's probably going to be a 13 out here. It is. Let me see how tight these are. Now I just drove the vehicle because I was doing the rear pads, so rotors are a little hot because I was really mashing on the brakes out there. If you're doing this when the vehicle's hot, be careful because all this stuff will be pretty hot. Okay, one thing I like to do, what I was doing on the other side actually, I crack open the bleeder screw and just let gravity bleed out. So I was just tying it back up. But just that way, while I'm doing this side, you know, the other side kind of gravity bleeds. And then I'll do this side as well. So also that way it changes out the brake fluid as I'm doing all the new pads and everything. If you have a helper, you can have them push the brake pedal and do it that way, but if not, then you can just do a gravity feed bleed. So I got these two 13mm bolts out. At this point we can slide the copper right out, and So normally we would have, let me get a hook to hang that. We don't let it hang by the hose. So get a piece of wire or just get one of these hooks and hang your caliper right in there, okay? Since what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna spray some oil eater in here. Let it start working so I can scrub that out and clean that up here in a little bit. Also removing the hardware, because our new pads came with new hardware. So at this point we can remove the pads, so they're not too bad, but we're gonna put new ones in there. And then I'm gonna grab a socket for the bigger one here, which should be an 18. We'll see how tight this one is. Not too bad. You might have to use like a cheater bar sometimes. Depends how tight they are. Put the bolts here. And then here's the caliper bracket. And so this is the new bracket, or the old bracket here. I'm gonna take out these clips. Looks like a new kit coming also with those new clips. And then we're gonna make sure that the pins here have lube in them. So we're gonna pull them out and lubricate them here in a little bit. Get a screwdriver and then just pry this little clips out. And I'm also going to put some oil eater in here just to clean that area where the clips are going to go. Alright, so at this point you're going to be ready to remove the rotor. This is the one that's going to be a little bit harder than doing it like on a two-wheel drive truck. We have to remove this cap, so they have this big old plier looking things that you can use to remove it, or you can kind of use a screwdriver, just barely tip it in, don't drive it all the way through because then you'll drill a hole in your cap. And so then just pry it, and actually you can just kind of go around. Once you pry a little bit, it shouldn't be too bad to take out. Pull that back out. And so this grease is pretty new. Looks good. I'm gonna grab a napkin and just clean up some of the grease from here so I can see what's going on. So this is where you're gonna need some pliers to get that. Some needle nose pliers work really well. You can bend your cotter pin, pull it out, and I'm actually gonna just keep this right here so it doesn't get dirty. And then there's gonna be this retainer, pull it out, and then there's this big nut here. You can use the socket, I'm not sure, I think it's about probably like an inch. I'm just gonna use a crescent wrench here. Maybe it's like a 13/16, but it shouldn't be really tight. On these, it should almost be just hand tight. That's why that capsule nut goes in there, so it holds it in place. If you really over tighten this nut, you're gonna kind of like mess up your bearings. So when we first put it together, we're gonna tighten it like tight to seat all bearings together, and then we're gonna back it out maybe a quarter of a turn. But we're not gonna leave it so tight. So I'm gonna put that aside there. And then there's also a washer in here that pushes against the bearing. Take that out. Now, as you can see, this bearing already kind of popped off here a little bit. So be careful if you're gonna reuse them so this doesn't fall on the floor for you. But you can put that aside if you're gonna reuse it. And then at this point, you're just gonna pull off your bearing, which is your rotor, which is really hot. Like I said, I just drove the vehicle, so I'm gonna use a couple of paper towels here to kind of hold on to it for a second. And there we are. Now, if you're gonna reuse this seal and bearing, easiest way to get it out from this point right here is to flip it and then get like a 6-inch extension and hit the bearing out, and the bearing is going to drive that seal out. Again, I wouldn't recommend, at least I would recommend get a new seal. That's the least expensive part. You know, but if you want to reuse it, that's how you would want to take it off, and that way it doesn't get damaged. So at this point, I'm going to wipe all this grease off of the spindle here. Now this would be the same process if you're changing the bearings, just the bearings, right? Maybe your brakes are okay, but your bearings messed up. Then you would follow the same process, except you're not gonna put new brake pads on there or brake rotor. Check everything, make sure it looks good. I'm gonna spray a little bit more oil in this caliper here. And just grab my brush so I can clean it. And it's not terribly dirty. You know, obviously it depends on your vehicle, but I just want to make sure when I put new grease in here, it's not all dirty where I'm gonna grease it. Then I use my brake cleaner. And just clean it up really good. Same with my bracket. Really good. So at this point also you can choose to paint your calipers. You know, if you want to paint them red, white, whatever, this would be a good time to do so. You have it off, mask everything, you can paint it, but it's up to you. So now I'm going to show you here how to set up your new rotor. That way it's good to go. And I'm probably gonna turn this light off. Makes it easier to see that. Okay. So your rotor is gonna come most of the time in a bag so that it doesn't get rusted. And I'm not gonna clean it off quite yet. But you do have to clean it before you are done. That way you get all this oil out of there. I'm gonna turn on this back here, and then we're gonna get started with the bearings. So make sure you get some wheel bearing grease. And what I'm gonna do is get new gloves because these are kind of dirty, since I'm gonna be putting the grease in there. Now, if you're reusing your old bearings, I mean, at that point, I would say it's not necessary to really you know, put them like in a parts washer or anything. You might as well just transfer them over, put a little bit extra grease. But when you buy new bearings, if you buy, sometimes they have like an inner kit, it'll come with the new race. Since the rotor already has a new race, I'm not going to use this. On the outer, I was able to just get the bearing by itself, so that's how it comes. So we're going to start with the back side here. Now if you look at the old rotor, when you get these, it has that ring around it, and that's for your ABS. Most of these vehicles don't have an ABS on the front. I think maybe only like the linings I did. So just keep that in mind. I mean, you might want to check. Most of them don't have it, and if you put a rotor that has the ring, it's not going to do anything. But if you do have the sensor and you put a rotor without the ring, you are going to get an ABS light. So there's that. So I'm just going to get some grease here, put it inside here. This is just kind of extra grease to sit in there so it cools down the bearing and everything. And then I'm going to also go around the race there. They do have the bearing grease, I don't know what they're called, but it's like a little machine that you put the bearing in. Actually, let me show you guys. It's called a handy packer. I think you guys can see. Let me just look here at the screen. Yeah, so it's just this little thing here, and what it is you put grease on the bottom. On the bottom of it in there, you put the bearing in, and then you're supposed to squeeze, so you kind of push down on the bearing. Let me show you guys. I guess it works pretty well, and it makes the grease go through the bearing all the way in there, so it packs it really well. I normally usually just push the grease in with my hand, you know, through each little bearing. Never really had a problem doing it that way, but there is this little kit here that you can buy. I guess I don't know why I bought it if I never use it, but you know, make sure you turn the bearing, make sure there's grease everywhere, and then you're gonna drop it right in there, and it's just gonna sit in there. And you're gonna be full of grease, so make sure you have a paper towel or something to kind of wipe your fingers off. What I like to do is get more grease and just kind of fill in the backside of that bearing there, and then just wipe off the excess. That's gonna, I don't want it to be flinging off on the side of the rotor. Okay. Now once you're here, your seal is going to go right in here. It goes right up here. So there's a couple different things. You can just use like your hammer to drive it in right now. But I have a bearing race driver, so I'm going to use that. This little kit, you can rent it as well. From a parts store, or you can just buy it, but it's used to drive those little races in there if you're putting all new race in. Let's say you're just doing the bearings on your old rotor, you buy the kit with the new race, then you'll have to drive that old race out and put the new race back in. So this, you know, you're just gonna hold it flat and then just kind of start driving it in. And you can hear when it's kind of solid, that means it's all the way in. If you don't have one of these, you can, you know, kind of start tapping it all the way around. Just be careful. You can do it that way. But at this point, we're done with the inner bearing. I'm gonna flip it. And so we're on the other side here. I'm gonna grab more grease, put some in there, in the race. Okay. And then we have to get grease on the bearing. So since I have this little thingamajig here, I'm gonna use it. And get my bearing packed. And then now you can drop it in there right now, but I'm gonna wait a second. I'm just gonna put it in here or put it in a clean paper towel, because if you put it in there, it's just gonna fall out. So you're pretty much ready to put your rotor back in the truck, or you know, at this time. All right, so now that we packed the bearing, we're gonna put the rotor back in. So grab your rotor, and then just be careful with that seal. So another thing that you might want to do is get a slight little bit of grease and just put it on the lip of that seal. That way it's lubricated. And then just carefully drive the rotor and that seal all the way in. Okay, so at this point, your rotor might fall out, so be careful. Kind of hold it, and you want to get your little bearing, your outer bearing, and this is where you want to, now you can put it in here. So okay, now that's in there. You're gonna grab that washer. I'm just gonna wipe this one. The washer has some flat spots, so it only goes in one way. That holds that bearing in there. Okay. And then you're gonna grab that nut, and you're gonna put it in there. And pretty much, if everything is good, you should be almost able to tighten this nut by hand, you know, to the rotor is good. Now, I wouldn't leave it like that because obviously the weight of the wheel and everything. So I'm gonna grab my crescent wrench. And there might be specs on this, you know, this is just how I do it. And I'm gonna tighten this nut, you know, so it's kind of tight. Turn the rotor a little bit. Okay, and maybe tighten it just slightly more. Now, I don't want to leave it there. I mean, it's turning, but it's got some resistance. But now that I tightened it up, I mean, I know my bearings are seated all the way. I'm gonna loosen it up, maybe like even, I mean, not even a quarter turn, but just loosen it up. And you can tell, once you loosen it up, you can turn the rotor and it kind of spins freely. So that's it. I mean, I can pretty much turn it by hand now, but I'm gonna leave it at the tightest setting. And then you put this little castle nut holder, make sure that the hole lines up. And you can put a new cotter pin or, you know, reuse that one if it's good. Make sure it's bent back on both sides here. Cotter pin prevents that castle nut in the nut from coming out. And again, your rotor should spin freely. And then you put your cap back on there. You put some grease on here. I'm just gonna put a tiny little bit more. If you put way too much grease in there, it's gonna just fall off. Once you start driving it, it's just gonna seep back out. So the rotor wants a fair amount, but not overly excessive grease. Once it gets hot, that grease, you know, liquefies and lubricates everything. But if there's too much, it's just gonna push its way out. So at this point, you know, we got the rotor all good. Then we can start on the brake pads. All right, so next is the brake pads. Now, I did mention to you guys before that you want to clean your brake rotor before you do your brake pads, so I'm going to do that also. So with this, I'm going to get a new paper towel here. And so I'm going to spray the rotor. And then I'm going to spray on the back side here. get my paper towel, and I'm gonna hold it and just spin the rotor all the way through. Make sure you get all that oil off. And that's good. I'll spray a little bit more brake cleaner. We're good to go. Go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and put this grease away here so I don't wanna drop any thing inside of there. I'm gonna put it on the other side. The other thing is I'm gonna grab my hardware kit. And before I get started on the caliper up here, I'm gonna go ahead and push those pistons all the way in. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use one of the old brake pads just to evenly push them back here. So it's this kind of awkward position here. Okay, so just push your pistons all the way in. There is a special caliper tool that you can use for this. Either way, just make sure those are pushed all the way in. I'm gonna go ahead and get my brake grease here. And I'm gonna coat the piston. So anywhere that it contacts the brake pad. And then the little tabs here, because these are gonna push against the brake pad as well. So. All right, and then I might as well put this little clip in here. We're good to go there. Your pins, make sure you pull them out and you clean them. And then you want to put some grease on them as well. Okay. Put them back in, make sure they slide good, and then make sure that boot goes all the way in. Same thing with the other side. Sometimes these are seized, you know, because the grease dries out, water gets in there. And so if you can't get it out, you're going to have to get a new bracket or caliper kit. So make sure you put some lube in there. Make sure it slides good. We're good there. And then on this one, I'm gonna put a little bit of grease here where the little bracket goes. Some people don't like to do this and where there's gonna be a clip here, but for me it's just as well as extra protection there. So then I'm gonna grab my clip and I'm just gonna put that new clip back in there. Okay, and the other side. Okay, and I'm also going to put a little bit of lube on top of the clip. Perfect, so at this point this is good to go. Let me grab some thread locker for those bolts. Alright, I'm going to put a little bit of blue thread locker on them. And so I'm going to go ahead and install the bracket in here. I touched the rotor with a little bit of grease, so I'll just clean that off there. Alright, make sure these are tight pretty well. Look up torque specs on these. I'll go back and torque them down. And so at this point we could put our brake pads in there. And so we're gonna slide them in. Normally I'll put grease on the pad, on the little tabs, you know, on here. But I already greased a little clip, so I don't need to. Now I will put a little dab of grease here because this is where it's gonna hit that clip on the back. But that's it. Okay. Be careful that your pad doesn't fall off there. So these kind of just sit in there. Get your caliper. And then put it over your pads. And it should slide right in. Now I'm gonna grab my bolts. There we go. And then the bottom one as well. And then tighten it up. Alright, so you're good to go. At this point, then, you know, you do the same thing on the other side. You're good with this side here. Make sure whenever you start the vehicle, you pump the brakes a couple times because that caliper is going to have to push out a little bit. Other than that, at this point, you know, you can, if you have a helper, you can have them help you push on the brake pedal to bleed your brake a little bit. You don't have to. I just want to flush all the liquid out, so I'm gonna loosen the bolt here. And just let it drain here for a little bit. Not drain, but let it, you know, the fluid come out there for a second. And then just keep an eye on top, right? Make sure that the level doesn't go too low and it dries out. So you can always gravity bleed these. You know, that works really well. Really any vehicle you can always gravity bleed. You know, that's what I always try to do because I'm usually doing it by myself. So unless I have a helper here. Other than that, I mean, you know, I'll let it drain for a little bit. I'll keep my eye out on the brake reservoir up here. Make sure it doesn't go down all the way. Keep adding fluid, but that's it. That's how you change your brake pads on the F-150. If you have any questions, comments, leave them below. Subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you.